One of the central concepts of Buddhism is anatman, not self. Which sort of means no separate self. And in actual fact, for most purposes, we can translate anatman by not separate. It's a fundamental Buddhist concept, but it exists in relation to the older Indian concept of Atman, self, which is related to Brahman, the universal spiritual essence of the world, of which each and every being is a tiny fragment, an Atman longing for reunification with the great all. It's kind of an attractive idea, and it's a hole down which Buddhism struggles not to disappear. An has the same function in Sanskrit and the related languages as it does in all Indo-European languages and English, Latin, that kind of thing. It negates it, so an Atman is simply not Atman, no self, no separate self, no separation. And in fact, dropping the self is quite a usual idea with that, because if we talk about no separation, it doesn't matter whether we think of it in terms of a self or don't think of it in terms of a self. The important point is, whatever I think of this me is not separate. Now, to avoid going down that rabbit hole of this universal cosmic self, transcendental on some rarefied spiritual plane. And again, Buddhism, Zen, has this kind of seemingly irresistible attraction from time to time to go down that route. But in order not to do that, I want to stick with the very non-transcendental, the very non-abstract, in some ways the very non-spiritual in how we might conventionally think of that terms, really sticking with the relative, the relational, this reality which we share here and now in every aspect of our lives. So let's go through some of the different ways we can think of this, and then think how these might begin to join up, and begin to look out for where our resistance, where our tendency to want to jump down some kind of transcendental rabbit hole, where we might experience that. So let's start with this body. Stuff. Flesh, bone. It's been remarked in this place before that we are all recycled stardust. Everything recycled stardust. And of course I'm also recycled Hitler. Flesh, bones, sweat, pee. I'm recycled everything. I am this body, but it has no definite limits. I eat stuff, I drink stuff. It comes out the other end. The actual physical makeup of me is changing all the time. I used to be very small. I got bigger. I'll get smaller again. I'll change form. I'll be recycled. I share that with every other being, every other, what we might want to think of as a thing in the universe. And this is the first point. We think, well, yeah, I get that, stuff, yeah. But that's not me. In which case we have to ask, well, okay, if that's not me, then what is me? Where do I want to go with that? Do I think it's my mind, my consciousness, my... Zen tells us no. Buddhism tells us no. Outside this, there's no outside. At root, body, and all the things that derive from body and arise from body are what you are. Let's think about this body. Well, maybe, okay, maybe I am this. But of course, what kind of self? I've already said I change. I gain matter, I lose matter. And in fact, is this body a thing? Well, it's yes and no. It's a thing made up of things. In one sense, it's a community of cells. And each one of those cells is itself a community made up of component parts. And okay, these days we're obsessed with DNA. A lot of the component parts of each cell don't have DNA that was my parents. Don't have that DNA. They have DNA from completely other sources. And actually, a lot of me is made up of, the flora, the little plants in my gut. So many different beings in community, sort of functioning as a whole. Yeah, we've got a metabolism. Energy comes in, gets processed in fairly reliable ways, as a result. But in some ways, this is more like a city than a single thing. And somewhere in that is me. I am this body. Not just this body, but and if I don't want to be this body, then what am I if I resist that thought? If I resist that idea? And of course, this kind of semi-autonomous, semi-independent thing is in actual fact entirely dependent on so many other things from, big fiery ball of gas in the centre of the solar system to produce heat, energy, light, the recycled matter that can form planets, an atmosphere. I'm a carbon-based, oxygen-dependent life form. Again, or carbon-based, oxygen-dependent community. Without that, I'm nothing. Without the bodies of all these other beings. That extent doesn't matter whether they're animals, plants, bacteria, whatever. Without incorporating them, they're becoming me. No me. Without this constant, infinite recycling, giving rise to new beings, recycling my refuse, no life. I'm interdependent, completely, utterly, with all other beings. And this, I'm actually no different from any leaf bud. It's spring, how marvellous. Been waiting for the buds to break. Now, last few weeks, so many of them. Growth, green, photosynthesis. Some still waiting, some shriveled, or latent. In many ways, I'm no different from that. And yet, I have this awareness of myself as a me. And I can experience this self as not separate, as interdependent, or I can experience it as something set against, other than the world, in relationship to world. And if I think of myself as fundamentally spirit, that makes perfect sense. There's a world of stuff, and there's my spirit, organising, commanding, failing, being crushed, whatever. But if I'm just part of this flow, this permanent organising, falling apart of world, of matter, of stuff, and I can try and see myself as a closed system. I can try and see myself as separate, and so much of our lives encourages me to see myself as separate, but I'm not. And kind of in each moment, I have that choice and no choice, because I'm carried here, I'm carried there. Sometimes I pause, sometimes I can experience, even have the sensation of choosing one way, the other way. Obviously, collectively, we think of ourselves along one lines or another, very different outcomes in the world. Why might I think of myself primarily in one way or another? Well, to begin to think about that, we have to ask what I think of myself what I think. What I think thinking is, what I think of thinking of myself as a self is. And here again, I find I'm just completely not separate. Is the material aspect of me separable from my thinking? Well, I've only got to get drunk, fall in love. The interrelationship becomes intimately experienced and very clear. No, these are not independent, separate levels, things. Likewise, the effect on my body, when I get angry, when I get afraid, or again, when I fall in love, this very immediate, intimate, intense interrelationship between what I wish to call the mental, the psychic, and the physical, the material. If I think about how I begin to become this thing that thinks about itself as me, then, well, we know last few decades of studies in child development have shown us that I'm not just a thing waiting to proceed along its own developmental path. I'm a being that comes into some kind of awareness as self in relationship to, and only because of the existence of other selves. Again, the physical level, it's quite clear. I'm utterly dependent on my caregivers when I'm little. But in a way, psychically, it's even more important. Without that mutual recognition, not just as, oh, look, there's something which appears to be in command of itself. It appears to have intentions. It looks like it can actually act on the world. Oh, maybe I'm like that. No, it's this mutuality. There's mother or father or whoever. They do this and I respond. I do this and they respond. They clearly know that I'm doing it to get a response. I clearly know that they're doing that to get interrelationship. And out of that interrelationship is joy, is love, is me and you. Mutuality, mutual recognition. So to even be aware of myself as an independent mind is only possible because of my interactions, my relationship with others. Even, and this might be slightly more on the edge, but even what we think of as the deep within, the unconscious, may, perfectly possibly, it now appears, be a response to others, to their attempt and failure to understand some of the subtleties of what others are communicating, and that lodging as trauma, as beautiful description, like a thorn in the side of the self that itches away. And out of that, the other. It comes from the other. So to be me, there is always the other. But I am never separate from the other. One implies the other. Not separate. And that's right at the heart of me in every sense. My possibility of thinking of myself as a me and you as a you. My idea that there are these deep, dark, unplumbed depths within me, this other within. My own multiplicity of, now I want this, now I want that. I seem to want two things at once. Who am I? How am I? We floated the idea of, different self states. I'm effectively somewhat different people in my professional life, my family life, so on and so on and so forth. It's all absolutely not separate, self and other, but always together. And so we unfortunately have this fundamental tension within the heart of us, because in order to be myself, I need an other. And yet, we can't be separated, and we constantly reconfigure, whether that's within me or within the world. So there's my own multiplicity, there's so much of me that I can't even begin to fathom. But then, if there's not some irreducible nugget of me, okay, I'm not any of this stuff, but still there's some kind of me mind in there. But if I can resist that idea, out of relationship, when relationship recognition are really functioning, we can actually meaningfully talk about this relationship, this moment, this connection. Again, parent and child might be the classic example, but lovers, football fans, infinite possible examples. Shared self-states. In this moment, this shared moment, we're effectively, in one level, the same self. We have the same approach, the same understanding, the same perspective on the world. And we can even take this into brain functioning, mirror neurons. My brain is wired so that I read your expression. I read your body posture. I read your gesture. The function in my brain actually then generates the same, or as close as it can, the same emotion. To an extent, and in some situations, and if I allow myself to, I can feel what you're feeling. In some senses, not separate. Our connections are so multi-layered, and this is just to talk about the material and what we think of as the psychic. A bit more I want to talk about. It's at this point, of course, that we remember that our parents, carers, teachers, colleagues, lovers, children are all from the beginning fully social beings. We all grow into this being unless we see it as some immortal, permanent, personal soul. We all grow into being this being within society. We use a language which we don't invent. We find things to say, and then we say, I'm expressing myself. And in one sense, that's perfectly true, obviously. And we can talk, and we will talk, about what we might mean by authentic speech, by real truth in a personal sense. But equally, we're using the tools we have at hand. And they're simply none of our making. And language is only the beginning of it. If we think just in terms of language, then we can elide, we can lose what's so important about the specificity of the social connections which we have one with another. So I'll take this up more next week, but for now, let's just mention, really. In our culture, it does seem to be a fact in this society, in most societies of what we think of as historical cultures within the developed world. We have sometimes the suppression, sometimes the devaluation of whatever is seen, whatever is classified in this moment, at this time, as feminine, emotion, a sense of connection, intimacy, preeminently perhaps the experience and the display of vulnerability. And so much of this centres on the body, the experienced body, the felt body. And so we have two routes out of this. We make the body invulnerable. We suppress it in that way. It becomes a hard body, an abstracted body, a body which is functional. It's the body of the warrior. Or we move away from the body altogether, and we have the non-body of the priest who ascends to a higher sphere, not burdened by the limitations of physical flesh. Or so they would have us believe, anyway. Or we can try and stick with this body, this not separate body. But these are the forces which traverse us, which create us and generate both our conformity and our resistance to all of this in trying to lead our actual, full, rich, embodied lives. So just to take these three levels, social, psychic, psychological, material, these are not separate from each other. And why? Well, obviously, really, they're all just ways of thinking. They're abstractions from this full, completely interrelated, interdependent, not separate reality, which we are, if we'll allow ourselves to just be that. It's all not separate. I'm not separate from other. That's the other within, the other without. I'm not separate from world. And yet, I, we, collectively and individually, constantly attempt all kinds of separation for an infinity of complex reasons. But if we could say at one level, our job is just to try and notice when we're eliding difference or when we're pretending separation. What do I mean by that? Well, pretending separation might be to say, go back to where you came from. You're not like us. To elide our differences might be to say, we, the American people, or all true Englishmen, or more personally, more intimately, it might say, I love you. Therefore you must love me. Meaning both. Well, of course you do, because I do, and equally. No, you must. Relationship, not separate, means recognition of my own difference, of your difference, of our collective difference at all these different levels. We need just this recognition of our non-separation, but not at some cosmic level, not at something we're thinking of as spiritual, but just in each moment, each awareness, each recognition, each relationship within our lives as they are, within life as it is.